winner of 11 Emmy Awards, including Station Excellence. Thank you for your support.
The 2012 Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, brought to you from Georgia Public Broadcasting, the Republican runoff for the 9th Congressional District.
Good evening. I'm Candace Presley, Assistant Program Director for News Talk WSB Radio in Atlanta. We'd like to welcome our viewers, our listeners on GPB Radio, and our live studio audience to the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, originating from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting. This is the debate between the Republican candidates in the primary runoff for Georgia's 9th Congressional District. Covering most of Northeast Georgia, the 9th Congressional District includes all or parts of 20 counties, including parts of Clark, Forsyth, and Pickens. Some of the largest counties are Gilmer, Fannin, and Hall counties. Now let's meet the candidates. They are, in alphabetical order: Doug Collins is the managing partner at the law firm of Collins & Sider. Doug practices law in Gainesville while serving as a chaplain in the U.S. Air Force Reserves. And Martha Zoller has had a long career in radio. In 2009, 10, and 11, Talkers Magazine named Martha one of the heavy 100 talk show hosts in America. Here's the format for today's debate. In the first round, each candidate will answer 2 questions from one of our panelists. In the second round, the candidates will have an opportunity to ask 2 questions of each other. Each candidate will have time for rebuttal in this round. And in the third round, the panelists will continue questioning the candidates. Finally, each candidate will have 30 seconds to make a closing statement. Before we get started, let's meet our 3 panelists selected by the Atlanta Press Club. First, we have Tom Crawford, editor of the Georgia Report. Next is Ashley Fielding, senior political reporter for the Gainesville Times. And our final panelist is Eric Sturgis, staff writer for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Now, let's get started with the debate. In the first round, each candidate will be asked 2 questions by our panel. The candidates have 60 seconds to answer. As moderator, I will determine if a rebuttal is necessary. By random selection, Martha Zoller gets the first question from Tom Crawford.
Mrs. Zoller, you have criticized your opponent because he voted for the legislation setting up the T-Splosh referendum. So I wanted to ask you, is it your position that our roads and highways are just fine and don't need any fixing, or is there an alternative that you would have taken besides T-Splosh to try to address our traffic problems?
No, I certainly think we do need some work in transportation, and what I would advocate is the state legislature to appropriate for that, and then have each individual state legislator stand for election there. You know, I think we were fooled a little bit with the T-Splosh, because a lot of people like me who support the fair tax have supported Splosh over the years, and in the beginning of this wanted to give a fair shake to what T-Splosh was. But what it really was a tax increase if you voted yes, and a tax increase if you voted no. So it was a no-win for the people of Georgia. Now, what I think has to happen is we've got to look at this going forward. We have to do things like keep our promises, don't increase tolls, which they're now going to end the tolls on Georgia 400. But one of the big things that went against people wanting to support T-Splosh is not keeping our promise on the tolls and other things around. So yes, there is a possibility there. We need to do more, but T-Splosh was not the way to do it.
And I'm going to allow your opponent an opportunity for a rebuttal here.
Well, I think it is interesting here that is being criticized on T-Splosh and being able to put that issue before the voters. I think in just your answer just now, Martha, it's interesting she'll support some tax increases. She just said she has been a supporter of Splosh. But on this one, especially after she became a candidate, she began to say this is not something she wanted to see. So in the past, she is, and even just right now, said that she supported what she has claimed is a tax increase every time she talks about T-Splosh. But yet it was simply allowing the voters to choose if they wanted to support the needs and the project of their areas. I think that's an interesting contrast, and especially even to right now.
Ashley Fielding, it is now your turn to ask a question of Doug Collins.
Mr. Collins, when you are confronted by your opponent about the hospital bed tax you voted in favor of in 2010, you often respond by saying that the end result was a $400 million tax cut. That tax cut largely affected property owners and wealthy retired senior citizens. Can you tell us what you've done as a state legislator to protect taxpayers who did not fall into those 2 categories?
I would love to, because this year we actually, on the tax package that we put through this year, that the governor put through, was $140 million tax decrease for those personal income. We ended the marriage, began the process of ending the marriage penalty in Georgia. We also added tax-free holidays again, so people could go out and buy not only the school supplies but the appliances. We took into account also their corporate climate. And really what we got to look at here, and this is important, when we've protected taxpayers, not only even then when we took off the property tax, which was on the state property bill, on the issue that you mentioned, that affected property owners all across the state. But we also took care of and looked at the both sides of the coin, not only the personal side of allowing people to have more money in their pocket, but also the corporate side, in which we're encouraging businesses. We took off the electrical inputs into manufacturing, which just in our district alone, up at Mount Vernon Mills, between their two plants saves millions of dollars that they're able to put back into the economy by keeping jobs and investing in their business. I have done a lot over the last 6 years to help protect the taxpayers of the state of Georgia, and will continue to do so in Washington.
Next, Eric Sturgis's question for Martha Zoller. Eric.
Since Representative Paul Ryan was named to the GOP ticket, there's been a lot of talk about his budget ideas, particularly his approach to Medicare, which Democrats will say will hurt seniors. Do you support his approach, and what, if anything, would you tweak about it?
Well, I think the most important thing to say about Paul Ryan's plan is it does not affect current seniors. If you're 55 and older, it does not affect you. I like the Paul Ryan plan, but I also put together in my campaign a plan called the Map for Prosperity, where we talk about accountability, we talk about bold reform, and we talk about citizen engagement. In accountability, it's things like if Congress doesn't pass a budget, they shouldn't get a full paycheck. In bold reform, it's about passing cut, cap, and balance, where we cut spending. We cap it at 18% of GDP, and then we balance the budget with a balanced budget amendment. And then finally, in citizen engagement, making sure that people can hear from their legislator and using the skills I have in communication to be able to do that. What's important is I've got a plan like Paul Ryan, and we're going to implement that plan, and you're going to be able to hold me accountable.
I'd like to actually hear from Mr. Collins on this. At some point, sir, we're all going to be 55, so what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I agree, and I think the great thing about this is we put a stark contrast for this fall. I think Governor Romney picking Congressman Ryan really puts it out there in determining which way do we want to go. Do we want to continue a big government approach, which I believe is killing jobs, and especially from a health care perspective, the Obamacare legislation, which is just killing jobs and keeping people from expanding in their current business because they don't know the business climate. We've got to continue to look at that, and I believe looking at long-term, whether it's Social Security, we move that to protect those 55 and above. There's been many plans out there that discuss that, but also dealing with Medicare, and we look at that. That's why I think it's a great choice and would support that in the future.
Thank you, sir. Our final question in this round is Tom Crawford's question for Doug Collins. Tom.
Well, Doug, let's pick up on that theme. Congressman Ryan, and I suppose Mitt Romney too, have said that they favor privatizing Social Security, regardless of whether a person's 55 or older. Do you agree that it might be a good idea to privatize Social Security?
I think we've got to move forward in preserving the system, and what we can do right now is moving that forward. Is I was just saying just a minute ago, we take 55 and above and we tell those that are already getting that, are already right on the verge of getting their Social Security, is that you're protected. We're not going to be removing anything from your current situation, but what we've got to do is we've got to begin to let those younger workers, and maybe a progressive step, maybe it's a tiered step where we take into between the ages of 35 and 45 or 55, and then the young ones being able to take a small percentage to maintain our current system, but then also be allowed to allow the younger workers to begin to put into something that they're investing in for their own future. The biggest lie we can't have right now is that when anything is discussed about Social Security is to begin to buy into the lie that if you want to make any changes, you're simply throwing grandma and grandpa off the cliff. We can't do that. This country's better than that, and I want to fight to continue to not only make the system stronger, but also make it a viable system for my kids and grandkids that I haven't even seen yet.
I'd like Martha Zoller to have an opportunity to rebut here.
Yeah, we have to tell the truth that if you're 40 or under, you're probably going to have to continue paying into some kind of Social Security system to pay for those that are older. But it's not a true privatization, Tom, and I really take issue with that characterization. It's taking a portion of what you would put into Social Security and do that in a private way. So I think it's important that we get the information right, that we get it out there, and we know that if we don't change Social Security and Medicare, we're going to have serious problems, and we're not going to be able to fix our fiscal crisis.
Thank you, Martha. That concludes round one. It is now time for our candidates to ask questions of one another. You'll have 30 seconds for your question, 60 seconds to respond, and then 30 seconds for a rebuttal. By random selection, Doug Collins will ask the first question of Martha Zoller.
Martha, and we've talked about this before, T-Splosh has come up a lot between you and I. And as I've mentioned just the other night, and we've talked about, in 2010, when you were on the radio show, it seems awful hypocritical at this point that you would be such against T-Splosh, but then in 2010, you thought it was a great idea. The question I have is, how do you reconcile your pre-candidate statement with your being a candidate now?
Well, it's not just a pre-candidate statement. Part of what I do as a political analyst at that time was to bring in all sides of an issue. And when you're trying to bring in varied and disparate and disparate parts people together to talk about something, you can't have taken a hard and fast position against something if you want to get your opposition on. So we're able to get people on to talk about it from all sides. And yes, I've learned. And I will tell you, as I traveled around this district, I was leaning towards not supporting T-Splosh and had talked about that frequently. But what I learned was that there were many counties that had huge debt because of other splost votes, and there was splost abuse, to coin a term. And so I learned that this was something that was not working and that we needed to do a little more. I think it's important to be consistent, but also when you learn something, you have to change your position.
You have a rebuttal, Mr. Collins.
Well, I do, and I think, Martha, there is a consistency here, because not only was this something you said when you were on the radio, and by the way, I guess you were still on the radio, but until September of last year, when you were already a candidate, you again said it was a good idea. And when you come back to that point, it just, I guess you maybe will have to come up with a different answer now that you said it both as a candidate and as a non-candidate. The problem that I have is you have attacked me on my record, and that's fair game. And what we have in our race is what you've said over time, and what people can say, this is what you're going to do when you become.
All right. We have time on that.
Right.
Well, let's keep it on the T-Splosh thing. T-Splosh is something we've talked about a lot. You voted for it 4 times. You knew the penalties were in there. But if people voted yes, it was an increase in taxes. Now that people have voted no, it's also an increase of taxes. How do you square that either way the people voted, they were going to have to pay higher taxes?
I think, as we have talked about before, and what I will say is I voted to put this on the ballot for the people of Georgia. They did that. I voted no, just as you voted no. And as far as anything else attached to this bill, I've already been on the phone and assured, and also talking to legislators and speaker as well, who say that we'll now take a look and they're going to fix anything part of the T-Splosh penalty-wise. I think the bottom line here is that what we've got to look at is consistency. And again, even today, when we've been standing here, it's a matter of which tax you're for, Martha. You now said you were for other splosh, but now you're not for this one. And it looks just more like political expediency than anything else.
It's not political expediency. It's about learning things. And then I think that the other part of it is that Doug doesn't want to defend his record. He doesn't want to defend his record on T-Splosh. He knew about it. He was asked about it dozens of times. He never explained to the people of this district what the penalties would mean. And he can't say anything other than that, candidate or not.
All right, Doug Collins, you now have your second question for Martha Zoller.
On this stage, just about 2.5 weeks ago, Martha, you stated that you had never supported civil unions. However, through videos that we have shown, and also through your own writings on human events, you have said that you do support civil unions, and it's a legal issue. The problem I have, and how I'd like to ask this question, is this. How, as a social conservative, can that ever be in context? You said we took it out of context, but for a social conservative, how can they trust you to understand that issue, and how could that ever be in context?
Well, it was definitely taken out of context, and you don't have to ask me. You can take a look at the news reports that have been written about the video clips that Doug Collins has sent out. But I do not support civil unions. I do support a federal marriage amendment, and I have been supported by Georgia Right to Life, Susan B. Anthony List, Rick Santorum, Governor Sarah Palin, Herman Cain. They do not support people who support civil unions. And Sadie Fields just endorsed me yesterday and spoke highly of my commitment to marriage since before 2004. So I stand by my record.
Your rebuttal, sir.
I think it's interesting, again, when I ask the question, and the change that's occurred, I think it's interesting that we have to bring in endorsements to validate opinion. Consistency over time this is what we're looking at, and the consistency on this issue is one of a consistency of record.
Well, and
not bringing in others to say, this is what I believe, this is what actually occurred.
And who do you want to believe? The people that have the record on this issue, or a
Martha,
desperate politician who
no
will say
rebuttal
anything?
here. It's now your turn, Ms. Zoller, to ask your second question of Doug Collins.
Yes, and I apologize. Lost track of the back and forth. I stand by the mail that my campaign is putting out. You voted for T-Splosh, you voted for the hospital bed tax, you voted for an extension of the hotel motel tax, and you refused to sign the taxpayer pledge in the State House. Is any of that not true?
Martha, in this race, I stand behind everything I said even to this moment. on you. And what I've also stood behind is every time we've talked about this, I've also said that the state of Georgia is better off in their taxes than they were when I went into office. We're paying less taxes today than when I came in. And that's something that can't be refuted because you can't go to a number and show any differently. And what I will continue to do in Washington, D.C. is vote against taxes. In fact, we need to cut spending and also cut taxes. That is my record on this, and that is what the people of the 9th District have understood, and what the people have understood can come from Doug Collins.
I'm proud of the fact that I worked in 2010 to try to keep people from raising taxes in Georgia, and that me, along with a lot of other people, went to the Georgia Senate and got them to turn that highest tax increase in Georgia history into a tax cut. And I'm proud of the work that I did on that, and I'm glad that Doug finally got on board on a tax cut across the board, but we will continue to have this debate.
That concludes our second round of questioning. For those who may be joining our program in progress, this is the debate among the Republican candidates in the primary election runoff for Georgia's 9th Congressional District. For our third round, we return to our panel of journalists who will ask questions of the candidates of his or her choice. Candidates will be allowed 60 seconds to respond, and again, as moderator, I will determine if an opposing candidate will be given 30 seconds for rebuttal. 30 seconds for rebuttal. We begin this round with a question from Ashley Fielding.
I'd like you both to actually answer this question, if that's all right. You've both said in earlier forums that you do not support the Farm Bill in its current form, noting a large portion of the bill's funding that goes to social programs. But just this week, the city school system in your hometown said that 76% of its students qualify for free or reduced lunch. Without those programs in the Farm Bill, what alternatives do you offer for feeding those children in need?
Who would you like to answer that question first?
We'll start with Representative Collins.
I think when you look at this position, you're looking at the Farm Bill, and the problem we have right now is the Farm Bill is not the Farm Bill. If the programs that are in there are 70% basically either food programs or welfare programs. And when you look at that, I think that's the problem that I think right now is the problem with the Farm Bill, and I think it's the problem that's coming across from both sides. We've got programs that we need to keep in place, and there's programs that need to be cut back on. The problem is you're putting in a Farm Bill, which on its face is not true. It's not truly going to the agricultural research and the things that actually would affect farms and grow. And the 9th District is full of farms. It's an agricultural district just like Georgia is. What I want to see is a workable Farm Bill that addresses agricultural needs. We address the other needs. Don't put this all in the welfare under a Farm Bill. And for students in our food stamp program or our school lunch program, those are programs that can be addressed in other ways. But putting it under the heading of a Farm Bill is really just misleading, and we've got to get back from that, and also got to pull away from it's really what I will say is the dependency generation, which is being underlined into this Farm Bill.
Time. Our next question will come from Eric Sturgis. I'm sorry.
And I'm sorry, is that a 30-second since she asked of both of us,
You
or do
have
I get a
60
minute?
seconds. You have
Okay,
60
a
I
minute.
apologize. She
No
just
problem.
flipped. So.
No problem. Look, I don't support the Farm Bill in its current form, but I am a strict constitutionalist, and I do believe that the Ag Bill is constitutional because it talks about that in the Constitution. So what we need to do is have an Ag Bill that relates to agriculture issues. And as far as the school lunch program, that needs to be dealt. If it needs to be dealt with, then let's deal with it separately. Let's have an up or down vote on it separately. It's certainly not ag, okay? It is certainly something different. So let's vote on it separately. So I think that that's really what we have to do when we're relating to the Ag Bill. Let's have agricultural issues together. I met with a group of farmers today from 5 counties. I heard loud and clear from them that there are certain things they need from the agriculture bill, but there are many things in there that aren't part of the Ag Bill. So that's where I stand on that.
Okay, now our next question will come from Eric Sturgis.
This question is for Representative Collins. You all talked a little bit earlier about endorsements like Sarah Palin, and Sadie Fields came out and endorsed Martha Zoller today, but you still don't seem to be quite convinced that Marsha is a true social conservative. And I was wondering if you can explain why.
Well, I think when you wanted to talk about issues of endorsements, I respect highly all the folks that have endorsed her. We just disagree on this point. And when you ask the question about a social conservative, I think it matters of a history of record. When you deal with the issue of civil unions, we've just discussed this just a second ago. I just don't believe there's any context a social conservative could say that that would be a good idea or that I would be supportive of in just saying it's a legal issue. And it goes back not just to her what she said on the radio. It was actually this campaign cycle when approached about this, her own campaign put out there said once the marriage amendments pass, we don't care what people do in there with private contracts. And on abortion, I've been on the conference committee of the last two abortion bills that were passed in the state of Georgia. That is my commitment to life. That has been my commitment for 30 years on life. That is why I believe in those statements that she's made where she wants to keep it legal and cites the life of a mother as an exception, which is a pre-Roe versus Wade argument. Those are the two things that I disagree on, just that social conservative side.
All right, time, and Martha, I am going to allow you a 30-second rebuttal here, yes.
Look, I tout my endorsements here because I've been asked this question by Doug Collins repeatedly, and he's just not going to accept my answer. These folks have endorsed me because they know me. Sadie Fields came on board, and we have worked for close to 10 years on this issue. I have a long public record, and I guess you can find me saying about anything if you want to. But what I will say is that I am for traditional marriage and the Federal Marriage Amendment, and I'm also for I am pro-life. I am pro-life. So there's no doubt about that. Look at my endorsements and not what a professional politician will say when he's desperate.
Tom Crawford, it is your turn to ask a question.
Well, I'll address this to Mrs. Zoller. You earlier said you like some of the things Paul Ryan has been expressing. One of the things he favors is the personhood amendment, which is the idea that a fertilized egg has the same rights as an adult human being. Do you agree with the concept of the personhood amendment, which would ban abortion in all forms, no exceptions, and would also outlaw in vitro fertilization? How do you feel about that?
Yes, I do agree with the personhood amendment, and I want to just say that a lot of people throw up the idea of stem cell research and things like that in this, and I'm very proud to say that my own son, Ricky Zoller, is doing adult stem cell research at the University of Georgia, and he's doing some groundbreaking work in that area. So yes, I do support the personhood amendment, but I also know that there is a lot of great research going on, and that's just kind of a bugaboo going out and saying that if you go to a personhood amendment, oh, the world's going to come to an end and there's going to be no good research done. There's great research being done every day right now in a moral and ethical way.
All right, we have a next question, Ashley, for you.
Mr. Collins, this question will be for you. Gas prices were at record levels last summer, and they're rising again, while oil companies are recording record profits. At the same time, these oil companies are receiving billions of dollars of tax breaks every year. As a self-proclaimed fiscal conservative, would you ever vote to end these tax breaks?
I think what we've got to do, Ashley, it's a great question. We've got to actually just overdo our tax system altogether. And one of the problems we got, and I just want to, as a side note here, one of the also reasons we've got a problem right now with gas prices, we have a government that's mandating ethanol use at 40% of our corn crop. And right now we have a severe drought. That's an issue that we've got to move away from. We've got to do away with ethanol. But let's go back to taxes. We need to move to a fair tax system. We need to broaden about our consumption-based tax, which eliminates the IRS, which gets rid of the tax structure that inhibits business and keeps them from growing. Instead of band-aiding the system and do this, we need to move forward on a fair tax system. If we can move forward that with a president who supports it and a Senate and a House supports it, then we're going to make great strides in helping not only improve our economy, but improves our job situation. If we can't, then what we need to do is there's possibilities of lowering the tax rate, and then you can work on broadening our base, again, in a consumption-based model where we can move forward. The problem right now is we're wanting to always want to band-aid something, or we're wanting to go after the nearest villain in the audience. What we've got to do is just redo the entire thing so we can get America going again.
Time. Eric Sturgis, you'll get our next question, please, sir.
Okay. This question is for Ms. Zoller. This week, undocumented immigrants who meet certain guidelines could apply for the federal government's Deferred Action Program, which spares them from deportation and allows them to work legally in the U.S. for 2 years. Good policy, bad policy? If you think it's bad, what would you do to fix it?
You know, I might think it's a good policy if we actually went through the Congress and went through the right process where it was passed in the House and the Senate, went to conference committee and was debated. But it's not a good policy as an executive order. What I support for immigration reform is we need to secure the border. Then we need to fix the visa system because many more people overstay their visas than actually come in across the border illegally. And I would suggest to do that is that on the date your visa ends is when your driver's license expires, and eventually we would be able to fix this visa problem. Then finally, we need a no amnesty work permit, a work permit that allows workers to come back and forth. So what I'm for is the process working the way it's supposed to. That means you pass in the House, you pass in the Senate, you go to conference committee, you debate it in the open air. You do not have an out-of-control executive branch that thinks they can fix everything through executive order.
Let's allow a rebuttal from Representative Collins here.
I appreciate that. I think I don't agree that it would be a good policy even if it did go through Congress. if it did go through Congress, then we're picking quote winners and losers again in our immigration policy. That's what's got us into the situation we're at right now. We need an overhaul of our immigration policy, not saying just because we have a story here that we like that we're going to protect. We need to take a holistic approach to our immigration, securing our borders, maintaining an H-2A program where our agricultural workers can get the help they need, and begin to move that forward. I don't think that would be a good policy even if it went through Congress.
All right, we're going to take our next question. That's going to come from Tom Crawford.
Question for Mr. Collins. Your opponent has mentioned your vote for the extension of the hotel-motel tax in the city of Atlanta. That tax was proposed to raise $300 million basically to build a new football stadium. Do you really consider that the best use of tax funds to spend $300 million on a football stadium for Arthur Blank and the Atlanta Falcons, or would it be better used for something else?
Well, I disagree with the premise of your question. It was never passed for a stadium. It never was passed. That was an extension, and that was passed on local legislation, in which was part of the city of Atlanta and the Fulton County, in which they had an existing tax that they extended. It was never for. And from our discussions, never for, and also Ed Lindsay and also Stacey Abrams, both who represent the city of Atlanta, I've had discussions with them when this first came out, and they said no, that was not for an extension of the football stadium.
Mrs. Zoller, since you were mentioned in the question, we'll allow you a rebuttal here.
You know, I think that one of the challenges are when you look at the tax increases that Doug has voted for, he always says it's not really a tax increase or it's a local control or something like that. The bottom line is, while the overall tax digest for Georgia might be better, there are certain portions of this society that are paying more in taxes and others that are doing better. And I think that we need to really look at that when we decide who we're going to vote for. Who is going to stand up for the taxpayer and who is not?
This was not a tax increase at all. Thank you.
Ashley, you have your next question.
This will be for you, Ms. Zoller. You've often referred to your opponent as the establishment candidate, but your campaign has also received a substantial amount of money from outside large Washington political action committees. How do you reconcile seeking to represent the voters of Northeast Georgia while taking support from so many outside interests?
We have followed all the rules on campaign finance, and so that's where we have to raise the money for this race. And as you know, Ashley, this has not been a big money race. I mean, the combined money that Doug and I have raised have been about what one candidate normally spends in a congressional race. So I don't think that the money issue is a big one. But here's what I'm proud of. I'm proud of the fact that I had grassroots endorsements from every single county when I came out of this, that people have worked for me in every single county, names of people that you would not know. I'm also proud of the support that I've gotten not only in the district but outside of the district. But I will represent the district because I've been there. Over the last 16 years, I have been the conservative voice in this district. I've been at the bake sales and the women's clubs and the church groups. I have been out raising money for causes in this district, especially for soldiers that have needed extra help. So I'm very proud of what I've done inside the district, and we're very hopeful as we go forward to this runoff that we're going to represent this district very well.
Representative, are you the establishment candidate in your rebuttal?
No, I believe Martha Zoller is the establishment candidate, especially when you deal with the Washington endorsements and the Washington money that has come into this race. We're very proud to have endorsements of the Speaker of the House, former Governor Senator Zell Miller, and a host of others, not only elected officials, but farmers and teachers and others in our district who've given us money where the vast majority of our money comes from. We represent, and we have said, we've made a statement in this runoff. We are the 9th, and we stand by that.
Our next question now will come from Eric Sturgis.
This question is for Representative Collins. There's been some discussion that if the Bush tax cuts aren't extended at the end of the year, the next Congress may have to increase the debt ceiling as part of an agreement on federal spending. Under what conditions would you vote in favor of increasing the debt ceiling?
Right now, there's no conditions that I would look at in supporting of extending the federal debt ceiling. And one of the things that in the inherence of your question was extending tax cuts that have been in place for almost really 10 years now. That's not an extension of tax cuts. It was a sunset that was put in to kick the ball, and kick the can down the road. Those are the tax rates that all of us have been paying, and they need to stay. We need, again, I'll go back to my statement earlier, we need a complete overhaul of our tax system, not one in which we keep coming back to this, or are we going to extend this, or are we going to fix this. We need an overhaul completely. That's why I've been supportive of the fair tax. That's why I'm in support of making a complete overhaul of our tax system.
Ms. Zoller, I'm going to offer you an opportunity to answer the question: under what conditions would you vote to increase the debt ceiling?
I would not vote to increase the debt ceiling, and I take issue with them being called the Bush tax cuts. I think a couple of you on that panel are 35 or less. They're probably the tax rates that you've been paying for the entire time you've been working. So I would argue that that would be a tax increase, not an extension of a tax cut. Also, my opponent, Doug Collins, has voted to increase the debt ceiling of the Board of Regents just 5 months ago. So we have to be sure that we can trust Doug Collins on a debt ceiling vote.
All right, time on that, and I will allow Mr. Collins a rebuttal on that point.
And again, it's just amazing how every time that we talk about a, quote, federal debt ceiling, Martha wants to bring up a debt ceiling, which we don't have in the state of Georgia. This was not even on budget, what she's talking about. There is no debt ceiling in the state of Georgia, and to have it framed in a question like that is just deceiving.
Our next question now is going to come from Tom Crawford.
Let me start with Mrs. Zoller, but I'd like both candidates to answer this, and I think I know what your answer will be. Will you vote to repeal Obamacare, and if you do, what do you propose to replace it with?
You said you're going to start with me.
Start with you, please.
Right. I have helped run my husband's medical practice, and in many ways for the last 20 years. I have seen what's happened to healthcare and how people have had to deal with everything from insurance companies to getting prescription drugs. I would vote to repeal Obamacare, but I would replace it with Paul Brown's bill, because Paul Brown's bill, Dr. Brown, is a bill that is going to unwind the federal government from this role in healthcare. Prices have gone up, premiums have gone up. Nothing that the president has promised in this has happened. But we could have gotten a little bit of a better bill if he had really wanted to work with Congress. This is the first major piece of legislation in over 70 years that didn't have bipartisan support. Every major piece of legislation, from Social Security to welfare reform, had bipartisan support. The president could have had it if he had wanted it. He didn't want it. He wanted it as a wedge issue. He wanted control, not health care.
Representative Collins, you have a minute to answer the question.
I appreciate it. I think the issue here is I'm not as so much into, I want to repeal it and go back to a base. I'm not looking to repeal and replace. I think we're going back down the same road again in looking at it just from a different perspective. What we've got to look at here is that I think Dr. Brown has some great ideas. In fact, one of his ideas was buying insurance across state lines, in which we've already passed in the state of Georgia, and I'm hoping insurance companies now will jump on board and begin to help with that. I think also Dr. Price, Congressman Price here in Georgia, has a great idea, especially in dealing with premium supports and other things that we can look forward to cutting costs. The problem is if government wants to jump back into it, we're maybe just jumping back into it to a different perspective. Let's take the role of the federal government, use what we already have, pre-existing conditions. Governor Deal, then Congressman Deal, had already been working inside the current Medicare system to have a high-risk pool, which this insurance could help take care of those in need. I think just simply to come back in and say we're going to replace it and repeal it and then replace it is probably not the best angle.
Okay, time. Ms. Phelan, we have time for one more question, and it goes to you, to either one or both candidates. If it's both candidates, each will only have 30 seconds to answer for time.
Okay, I would like for both of you to answer it, and Mr. Collins, I'd like you to go first since Ms. Zoller did last time. Polls show that a lot of people are not happy with Congress in an era of deep partisan divides. If the Senate and the House remain controlled by opposing parties after the fall election, how will you work to get the wheels turning?
The same way I have in the last 6 years in the State House. In fact, I point to a bill last year, the HOPE legislation, which was a large bill in a very discussion point for a lot of our students in our state. We actually worked across party lines. The governor did as well, so that when we actually came forward with the bill in the House, the minority leader in the House actually signed on as a co-sponsor of the bill. It's basically taking your conservative principles and finding others that you can work with. And you can work with folks when you have a common goal of what is good for Northeast Georgia and also good for America.
Ms. Zoller, 30 seconds to answer the question.
Yes, I'll be able to work with people the way I have throughout my career. I have worked in the corporate world where I've had 60 people working for me and have had to deal with that. I have raised a family, as well as I have worked managing my husband's medical practice. But I've also built a media career where I've seen politicians on and off the record, and I've been able to work to get things accomplished there. That's what I'm going to bring to Washington, a different and fresh perspective that's going to be able to get things done.
Thank you. We have no more time for questions. Each of the Republican candidates in the primary runoff for Georgia's 9th Congressional District now will have 30 seconds for a closing statement. Martha Zoller was randomly selected to make the first statement.
I'm Martha Zoller, and I've been your conservative firebrand voice for more than 16 years in North Georgia. And like Paul Ryan, I have a plan. I put in writing how you're going to hold me accountable, and it's called the Map for Prosperity. You can go to marthaforcongress.com and take a look at that. But that's not the only difference between me and my opponent. My opponent does not support term limits. I do. He has a lot of Gold Dome insiders that support him, lobbyists and Democratic lawyers, but he has also voted for tax increases. But we are going to not do that if you elect me to Congress. We want you to vote early or on August 21st.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
for your vote.
Mr. Collins, you have our final closing statement.
Thank you. I got in this race for 3 simple reasons: Jordan, Copeland, and Cameron. They're my 3 kids. And we got in this race because we have a proven history of working with people and also working for the people of the state of Georgia. I want to take that to the next level because in Georgia, what we've done in cutting taxes, cutting spending, and doing the things it takes to get Georgia back working are the very things and the common sense conservative values we need to take to Washington. Don't buy the hype. Look into the records, collinsleads.com, and you'll realize that Georgia is better off right now in our taxes and our spending, and that is what I've been a part of, and that's my record.
That concludes our debate. We'd like to remind voters that the primary runoff elections will be held on Tuesday, August 21st. Our thanks to the candidates and to our panel of journalists. We'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging today's debate. For more information about the Atlanta Press Club, you may visit atlantapressclub.org. The debates that air on Georgia Public Broadcasting will be archived on the Press Club's website. This broadcast has been streamed and will be available on demand on GPB's website, gpb.org. I'm Candace Presley. Thanks for joining us for the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series. Stay with GPB for more debates coming up next.
Become a better voter. Debates continue next with the Republican runoff for the 12th Congressional District on GPB.
This is a GPB original production.